What was the true history of Jesus' people which led to his teachings as we know them today in the New Testament? Hello, and welcome to my ex-Christian Bible study bonanza. I am here to help you deconstruct. We're talking about the textbook, the New Testament, written by ex-Christian biblical historian Bart Ehrman, and this is part 2 of the 4th chapter. Please come along. I already said in the first part of chapter 4 that I am pro-Palestine and anti-Semitism, and I'm reiterating it here. I happily welcome intelligently thought-out discourse, but I will be deleting any pro-Zionism nonsense. If you'd like to know more about the history of the Hebrew Bible and the ancestors of Jewish people before the time of Jesus, I like the book The Bible Unearthed by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman. In a very short summary, nomads lived in the area nowadays known as Palestine. These nomadic Canaanites settled the region and built the city of Jerusalem. They began to develop an identity as a people called the Kingdom of Judah or the Israelites, depending on the time period you're referring to. This led to the worship of Adonai and the development of the Hebrew Bible, which included the Book of the Law, which is what religious Jews follow today. As an interesting side note, the story of Moses is a myth. There's no archaeological evidence that it's true. A lot of other Bible stories are myths, but we don't have time to get into all of that today. The Judahites struggled for cohesive existence because the region was unstable, with many powerhouse countries invading everybody. Around 600 BCE, the Babylonians invaded the region, destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem, and took captive and dispersed the Judahites all over. After this is when they began to be known as Jews. By the time of Jesus, there were far more Jews in the diaspora than in Palestine. Some scholars calculate that in the days of Jesus, twice as many Jews lived in Egypt as in all of Palestine itself. Many people of this time would worship the local deities if they moved somewhere else, but a distinctive feature of the Jewish people was that they continued to worship the God of their homeland. Remember from last chapter that people were concerned mostly about survival, and they believed local deities would be most interested in helping them. But the Jewish people were unique in regarding worshiping Adonai and keeping the law as part of their identity. About 50 years after the Babylonian invasion, the Persians invaded the region and overthrew the Babylonians. The Persians ended the Jewish exile and allowed their temple to be rebuilt. Although the Jewish people were under the rulership of Persia, their leaders and priests were allowed to be somewhat self-sufficient, especially when it came to religion. But then, about 200 years later, Alexander the Not-So-Great came a-conquerin' and things got hairy again. Like I said, the region was unstable for quite a time. In 63 BCE, Rome wrestled itself into power. There was a lot of back and forth about whose culture would dominate, whether the Jewish people could follow their own customs, and whether they wanted to follow their own customs. As an example, some were happy to reverse their circumcision so they wouldn't be recognized as Jewish at the local gymnasium. Some wanted to keep their cultural heritage and were proud of being Adonai's chosen people. I've greatly whittled down the history of the region's thousand-year history before Jesus, but I wanted to discuss it for a reason. The Jewish groups that Jesus refers to in the New Testament, such as the Pharisees and Sadducees, were created in response to the socio-political issues that arose with all the occupations and destruction. We need to understand that the Jewish people were oppressed in the time leading up to Jesus' ministry, and what he says is in response to that reality, not anything happening today. Christians today are not oppressed. They are the ruling class. The verses that they cherry-pick to make it seem like they're oppressed actually refer to physical realities Jewish people were dealing with at the time. Most are not metaphors for a war happening on the unseen spiritual plane. They were about the occupation of Rome and conditions the Jews were dealing with on a daily basis. In the final part about chapter 4, I'll go over who exactly the Pharisees, Sadducees, and 2 other groups were.